All right, everyone, let us get started. Good afternoon. My name is Dylan McDowell, and I'm Deputy Director of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, or NCEL. Today, in honor of World Oceans Day, NCEL and state legislators are announcing the launch of our Coastal Working Group. This group is formed by state legislators representing 18 coastal states to highlight the need for ocean-based solutions to address climate change and ensure healthy communities. While the ocean has seen the consequences of climate change from sea level rise, ocean acidification, vanishing habitats, there's untapped potential to be a solution to the climate challenge as well. On this call, we have legislators from 6 states who are all leaders on ocean climate policy. These legislators have worked to transition away from offshore drilling toward offshore wind, fight ocean acidification, ensure coastal resilience, and more. They all share the same recognition of the oceans being part of the solution and having states work together towards a common goal. Our represented states include Hawaii, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Washington State. Unfortunately, our Senator Don Oyer from Rhode Island was not able to join us at the last minute due to a legislative conflict, but is very excited to be participating in the working group going forward. First, I wanted to provide a quick introduction about NCEL for those that aren't familiar. The National Caucus of Environmental Legislators is a nonprofit organization created by and for state legislators. We have a network of over 1,000 environmentally committed lawmakers from all 50 states and both parties. We do not lobby, but rather we organize and convene legislators to share opportunities to share ideas and collaborate on environmental issues. And today, our country and our oceans are at an inflection point, and states are a crucial component of incorporating ocean-based solutions into climate action. The legislators from these 18 states are forming the Coastal Working Group to increase their collaboration, share their lessons learned, and identify best practices for policymaking. The group's going to meet with monthly meetings, policy briefings, and opportunities to engage with members of Congress. As the federal government shows a renewed focus on climate action and sustainable ocean policy, states are going to be crucial partners for them as they have been leaders and pioneers on ocean-based solutions for a long time. Forming this group will give legislators a stronger voice in partnership with the federal government to strengthen not only state policy, but federal policy as well. So I'm proud to be here today alongside dedicated legislators working on the cutting edge of state legislation to protect our oceans and our coastal communities. I'd like to turn it over now to NCEL's Ocean Policy Fellow, Ava Ibanez, who will provide an overview of climate policies and the current legislative landscape.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and special thanks to all state legislators that are joining us today to talk about ocean climate action and to help us formally launch NCEL's Coastal Working Group. So before we move forward, as Dylan mentioned, I will give a brief high-level overview of state ocean policy. The ocean holds powerful climate solutions, and the policies I will broadly highlight today aim to embrace those solutions. I will begin with energy transition. Energy transition nationwide, away from fossil fuels and toward renewables, is key to mitigating and preventing further effects from climate change. States recognize this need and have largely led the initiative. As of 2020, 10 states passed legislation banning or restricting offshore drilling. This year, 6 additional states introduced legislation to ban or restrict offshore drilling, as well as related activities, such as seismic testing. States, however, have not stopped there. This year, 8 states introduced bills to support offshore wind development. These bills establish development goals, establish procurement programs, and aim to create comprehensive frameworks that take into account workforce development, environmental impacts, and establish working groups formed by local communities and industries to ensure the responsible development of offshore wind. States have also acted to protect their coast from ocean acidification, sea level rise, storm events, changes in the diversity and abundance of marine species, and the list goes on. This year, at least 30 bills were introduced in 11 states to address different impacts that climate change has or will have on the environment and coastal communities. These coastal resiliency policies include funding ocean acidification research, establishing a state coastal program, creating programs focused on restoring coastal habitats, establishing a coastal cleanup fund, integrating consideration of sea level rise into existing laws, establishing a plan to address sea level rise, and more. These policies are only examples of the numerous nature-based solutions that the ocean offers and that state legislators across the country are actively working on. Today, states and the federal government have the opportunity to act to protect our ocean while protecting communities and promoting a healthy and sustainable economy. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Beth Kurtula, NCEL's board president and former Alaska legislator. Beth served in the Alaska House for 15 years and as a House Minority Leader from 2006 to 2014. She also served as the director of the National Oceans Council under President Obama, and we are thrilled and honored to have her joining us today. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Ava, and thank you to all the state legislators on board today and to any of you listening online or press. It's really exciting to be here at the beginning of our Coastal Caucus. You know, I like to think that really we're planet ocean. I mean, there's more ocean than there is Earth. And when I think about it that way, it's just very obvious that we must work to use the solutions that the ocean can give us and also to protect it. When I was in the legislature, I used to feel really lonely some days, like you're out there and no one understands and you're trying hard to get something done good. When we had the first cruise ship pollution bill in the nation, it was just, you just sat there looking for help and answers. And I'm so proud that NCEL has stepped up to the plate. It has grown. We're over 1,000 members now. And David Waters can remember when we were, sorry, David, dating us, we were like maybe 20, And this ocean working group has such talented people on it. My great hope is that we can become the building blocks to be able to work together to really do great things on the ocean issues. And we have so many, as Ava just expressed, but there's legislation on the state side. And with the new federal administration, it just gives me tremendous hope that we will be able to work together with the federal government to really step up and to not only save the ocean, but to step forward, as many of you have already said. So I just want to give my congratulations. I'm excited about participating in this and to thank everyone who, if you're out there picking up plastic, if you're going and measuring, particles, if you're looking at the ocean and thinking about the impacts of pollution from oil, I really want to encourage you to keep it up, keep up the pressure, because without the ocean, we won't be here. So it's that important. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I am going to turn it back to Ava to turn it to our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you so much for those words. Dylan, I know you as our moderator will introduce the speaker, so I will hand it out to you.
Happy to.
Sorry,
Thank you
Dylan.
so much, Beth. No worries. Thank you so much. Now let's go to some of the active states. We'll start with Maine, where Representative Lydia Bloom is going to share some information. She's also chair of Maine's Coastal Caucus. And Representative Bloom, I know you have some legislative commitments today that may draw you away early, so we really appreciate your time. The floor is yours. Oh, and you're on mute, Representative.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Ava and Beth, for your nice words of introduction. Inflection point, I think that's a very good word. We in Maine, I've seen an incredible growth in our response to climate change, especially in the last couple of years. We just published our Maine Climate Action Plan that was out in December. And this is our first legislative session with that climate action plan in place. And we're seeing legislation on climate related issues in almost every committee. So it's certainly an all of government approach to mitigation, carbon reduction, and resiliency planning. We have about 3,500 miles of coastline in Maine, one of the largest. And we have strong working waterfronts and strong marine industries here in Maine, which are very important and are seeing rapid changes to the fisheries. The lobsters are moving further north, for example. So there's a lot of we have to act. And I think with this Maine Climate Action Plan, it's actually said Maine won't wait. We're delving right into it. We have, I think there was a science and technical working group that actually took the best and most relevant information regarding climate and applied it to Maine. And they came up with a very strong chapter on sea level rise. And they have put into, they have suggested or recommended that the state prepare for 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 4 feet by 2100. And so I think what we have just passed is a resolution that it directs 8 state agencies, 8 of them, from Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry to the DOT, to the DEP, to review their regulations and make sure that sea level rise is in them, is those numbers, 1.5 feet and 4 feet are in statute. They will come back with recommendations to us in the next legislative session as to what laws need to be passed to support that. But I think that's where, we're doing a lot of things on the carbon reduction, the energy, offshore wind. We have a patented technology, floating offshore wind, out of the University of Maine, we're very proud of. And we just had a unanimous vote out of committee, bipartisan support for the offshore wind initiatives that we're following and pursuing. So that's really good news. But I think what I'm talking about now in terms of resiliency planning is really getting climate change and looking at the statutes from a state level to make sure that that it's in there, that we can help prepare our communities with all of the science put into the regulations. And so I call it foundational work we're doing on resiliency planning, for example. Good news is that we need to act fast, but we need to act smart. And I think that's what we're doing here in Maine. Very proud of our state, very proud of what we're doing, and excited that the federal government is stepping up as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. It's always inspiring to hear the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move slightly down the coast to Massachusetts, where State Representative Dylan Fernandez is joining us. He is also the co-chair of the Massachusetts Ocean Acidification Commission. Representative, I know you're on by phone this time. Are you ready to take it away? Apologize for some technical difficulties here. While we get that, here we go. Joining us now. Hello, Representative Fernandez. We are just moving down the coast from Massachusetts, or into Massachusetts, so it is your turn. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. And I apologize in advance for any background noise, just getting out of another meeting. So thank you so much for having me today, and special thanks to Dylan and Ava and Beth and everyone at NCEL for creating this really important coastal working group. The impacts of climate change and environmental degradation do not recognize state boundaries, and having cross-state collaboration on these issues is essential if we hope to make meaningful change. And so I'm Dylan. I represent Falmouth, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket, a district with more coastline than any other legislator in Massachusetts. And as a millennial legislator, there's no issue that will impact me and my generation more than that of climate change and really these coastal issues. And the impacts of global warming shroud the future of my district and really all our coastal regions across the country in uncertainty. The storms are growing stronger and increasingly rising seas. Marine life, migrations are moving further and further north, and we're seeing that impact our fishing communities here. And pollution and carbon emissions rapidly acidify our ocean, threatening really valuable species to our local economies and to our ways of life here in these coastal communities. And so there's no question that we will have to undergo dramatic changes as coastal legislators and communities to adapt to whatever the future may bring. And it's really on us as policymakers to mitigate the damages caused by global warming and work towards a sustainable future. And to that end, I just want to quickly highlight two bills that we filed this session. One is the Ocean Act to combat ocean acidification, and the other is the Power Act, really focused at promoting offshore wind and sustaining Massachusetts as kind of the hub of offshore wind in the country. And so, following the really inspiring work of Representative Bloom and Senator Water, and thanks to the artful, collaboration from NCEL and Dylan in particular, we filed and passed legislation creating the Massachusetts Commission on Ocean Acidification last session. And then as the chair of that commission over the past year, we really dug into the details and found that the Massachusetts blue economy is one of the largest in the country. We have a fishing industry generating more than $600 million in gross domestic product annually. We employ 6,000 people who have over 300 million in wages here. In this sprawling industry, I'm actually in New Bedford right now, the biggest commercial port by landings in the country. This industry is deeply threatened and very vulnerable from ocean acidification. And so these findings led us to create a roadmap of policies, which we've now turned into a comprehensive bill called the Ocean Act, which is an act to overcome coastal and environmental acidification and nutrient pollution. Thankful for the staff on the creative naming there. And so this bill will create a permanent ocean acidification council in Massachusetts to oversee and streamline state efforts. The council is directed to establish a broad ocean monitoring system, which is really key to tracking pH and managing shellfishing operations. And the council will also conduct studies to fill really important knowledge gaps and direct funding towards mitigation and adaptation programs. And we also revise current language in our general laws to incorporate ocean acidification into both kind of environmental and coastal mitigation programs around coastal pollution, but also to fall in line with our state climate resiliency efforts. So adding ocean acidification in the statute and both of those two components that already exist in our Massachusetts general laws. And look, ocean acidification, big part of what we're dealing with as coastal legislators. And that bill mainly goes on its impacts from land-based pollution and eutrophication and the like. But the global carbon emissions are a central driver to ocean acidification. And so we need to do everything in our power to combat this global commons problem of CO2 emissions. And so that brings me to our next large piece, which is around the offshore wind industry in Massachusetts. And while we already led the nation in putting forward legislation calling for the first utility scale deep water offshore wind project, we need to build on that. And after years of kind of this industry languishing under the science denying Trump administration, we're so thrilled to see that President Biden has just approved Vineyard Wind 10 miles south of my district, right off of Martha's Vineyard, as the nation's first utility scale project. And so the bill that we're putting forward, it's called the Power Act, an act to power offshore wind and renewable energy, expands offshore wind development in our state. And it's really an omnibus bill to both streamline the procurement process and also ensure a just transition to a clean energy future by codifying that these wind jobs are good paying, that they involve economic justice communities in the hiring process. And then we also create really clear environmental standards around mitigation, especially with a direct fund for our fisheries industry. And so while Nantucket at one point kept the lights on across the nation through the whaling industry, now projects just a few miles off its shores will power tens of millions of homes in Massachusetts and across New England. And so tackling these issues that affect our oceans will only be done if we continue to work together at all levels, state, local, and federal. And so I just want to thank my fellow colleagues here today, and in particular to NCEL for creating this caucus. And I look forward to all the future conversations and legislation that this will bring. So thank you, Dylan, so much.
Thank you so much, Representative. And it's always great to have another Dylan working on the ocean issues together.
Strong man.
Going all the way over to the state of Hawaii, we have Representative Nicole Lowen next. Representative Lowen is also chair of the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. Representative Lowen, take it away.
Aloha and good morning, everyone. It's still 8 a.m. over here in Hawaii. So, thank you for including me in this today and for the introduction. In Hawaii, it's pretty impossible to overstate the value and importance of our oceans and reefs. They're essential to every aspect of life in Hawaii, and coastal communities are where the vast majority of people live, work, and play. We depend on our oceans and coastlines for jobs, for our economy, for the tourism industry as a source of food and recreation, and for important cultural practices, and also as protection from floods, erosion, and storms. And over the past decade in particular here, we've been really experiencing very real impacts of climate change and human activity on the health of our oceans. We've had a couple coral bleaching events that have caused pretty extensive damage and mortality to our reefs. And issues like invasive species, runoff, and non-point source pollution, also contribute to that and inhibit recovery that are a big concern. And of course, these issues are not just important for the people of Hawaii. Reefs are often referred to as the rainforests of the ocean, providing carbon sinks and banks of biodiversity that are important globally. And it's our responsibility here, or in Hawaii, we would say it's our kuleana, to be the protectors of this resource for the planet. We have taken steps and bills passed in this year and in recent years to work towards protecting the reef. Hawaii does have a 30 by 30 goal to protect 30% of our ocean resources by 2030. We've passed bills to protect individual species that are important to the reef, like apex predators, like sharks and rays. We are currently working on, or the administration is working on, putting rules in place to protect herbivores, which are also important to the reef for recovery after coral bleaching events, to prevent them from getting suffocated with algae. And we've established marine protected areas, fish replenishment areas, and have taken efforts to do a better job managing our fisheries. And we've also taken steps recently to think more about incorporating sea level rise into future development plans. Just this past year, we passed a couple bills relating to sea level rise. One requires disclosure for every real estate transaction of whether a property is in the sea level rise inundation area or sea level rise exposure area. This exposure area was established by work of our Climate Commission. So we have a clear idea of what that means. And we also passed a bill for every state agency to work with our State Office of Planning to identify its critical infrastructure in the sea level rise exposure area, and to plan ahead for mitigation for sea level rise impacts. However, we really still need to do more, considering just how fundamental to Hawaii's way of life our oceans and reefs and coastlines are. And for that reason, I think the establishment of this group will be a really valuable resource to help have other legislators who face similar issues to discuss this stuff with, to get ideas from other states, and to have the help of NCEL, who's been so helpful in the past on other issues to collaborate with. And in addition, where we often think of, in Hawaii at least, of our oceans and reefs and coastlines as victims of climate change, I really appreciate the focus of this group on also thinking about them as possible solutions. And they can be carbon sinks, they can be increased efforts of carbon sequestration. We can develop ocean-based renewable energy projects, as was mentioned earlier, innovate our fishery management practices, and potentially develop and test new technologies even. And so with that, I'm open to further questions, but again, I'm really pleased to be here today to be a part of this group, and I look forward to getting to work on these issues. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative. And to all of our live stream viewers, please be sharing your questions there, and we're transmitting those through, and we'll come to questions at the end of this. Now we are going to stay on the West Coast for the time being and go to Washington State, where Representative Deborah Lekanoff is joining us.
Thank you so much. And it's great to see so many of my colleagues and familiar faces. My name is Deborah Lekanoff. I serve in the 40th Legislative District, which represents the heart of Western Washington, which is our San Juan Islands. Similar to my colleague, Representative Lowen, these San Juan Islands are beautiful islands that are located within the Salish Sea that are being impacted by the increase of sea level rise within the sea, but within the ocean. Washington State alone has 3,300 miles of coastal and marine waters. We are facing sea level rise, just as our friends to the north in British Columbia, up through Alaska, down through the coastal ways of Oregon, California, and out to my wonderful friend, Representative Lowen's area, out to Hawaii. We in Washington State are proud to say that we've collaborated by including academics from the University of Washington's Climate Change Impact Group, which invests in climate change impacts to sea level rise within the ocean side, but also the impact internally to the Puget Sound, and then into flooding systems, and also up towards the impacts of glacier melting and how that impacts us. Because we know, as all of you within Washington State, sea level rise is impacted by all of these different variations and changes to the ecologies within our systems. With the sound science being created by our partners at the University of Washington at the Climate Change Impact Group, we're developing policies that not only impacts the sea level rise within our communities, but also impacting the resources and the warming of the waters. The impact of the warming of the waters along our ocean shores of Washington State has been detrimental to us, as we've seen ocean acidification along our shorelines, impacting our shellfish beds, impacting our forage, and impacting our habitat, but also just facing the devastation of the warming of our ocean waters. You know, I go back to a tribal leader that has been part of my life for a very long time, and that's the president of the National Congress of American Indians right now, the Quinault Vice Chair, Fawn Sharp. I remember her tears as she stood on the platform sharing with Washington State and with Washington leaders and leaders across the nation, as she had a knock on the door in the morning that said, President Sharp, we have thousands of our precious seafood washed up on the shorelines because of the warming of the waters. All the different resources, as she walked across her traditional lands of the shorelines of Quinault Nation, washed up along the shorelines. Thus, the scientists had called back and said, it is the warming of the waters. Not only is this impacting our tribal nations, who also have treaty rights within Washington State, but it's impacting my local governments. 171 sites along Washington shorelines are being impacted by sea level rise and warming waters. Thank you to our colleague, the other Dylan, from the East Coast, who talked about the impacts upon environmental justice in these communities, but the impacts also to the growth management that's going to need to be incorporated into our coastal communities. Washington State right now is facing 12 years of investing into our districts, into the Growth Management Act, which requires us as Washington State to work with local government to plan for the sea level rise, to plan for the impacts along our local communities that will have to pick up and move back, which will impact how are we going to address not only the growing impacts to our communities, but also the industries. Like many of you, Washington State is a salmon state. Like many of you, Washington State is a state that relies upon a prosperous and healthy salmon industry for commercial fishermen, for tribal fishermen, for recreational. We are a state that believes in our salmon, and the impact of climate change and sea level rise is vital to us. So as I close up as a state representative and I look upon my fiduciary responsibility to my local and state government, but my tribal responsibility to treaty tribes and my environmental justice and equity responsibility to my communities, I lean to the bill that we just passed in Washington State, and that is the Climate Commitment Act, where we're investing in becoming a resilient state by reducing carbon emissions, doing what we can in Washington State to reduce the impact of climate change. Now we know these answers today are being bold and strong as we need to. However, the tribal part of me remembers that it is these generational investments today that we take in Washington State, that the governor has taken, Governor Inslee, so boldly saying, climate change is here, sea level is here, our house is on fire. In Washington State, he moved us as not only a governor, but as a legislature and as tribal communities to invest in the climate change, the Climate Commitment Act, to look at climate change and take that bold step here today using sound science, sound programs, and investing in those programs that are going to build us a more resilient and better climate change for generations to come. The Native American woman in me knows that we have to take that bold step today. So generations from now, we will look back at this time period and know we did scientifically, politically, and legally what was right to be able to protect the children of tomorrow. So Dylan, thank you. And I turn this back over to you. And thank you, Governor Inslee, for taking a bold step forward.
Thank you so much, Representative, for those inspiring words and for all the work you're doing. I want to come back to this environmental justice piece in a moment when we start the questions and really talk about that a little bit more. But first, I want to let us get a chance to hear from State Senator David Waters in New Hampshire about some of the work happening there.
Well, thank you so much, Dylan. Now, New Hampshire may have a small coastline, but its economic and environmental importance are huge. Our coastal waters and Great Bay Estuary drive the state's economy and provide substantial recreational and industrial benefits. Having blocked offshore drilling, states like New Hampshire must work together to develop and support policies to accelerate offshore wind development, as Reps Bloom and Fernandez have mentioned. Because for us, the Gulf of Maine can be the Saudi Arabia of wind power. I chair New Hampshire's Commission on Offshore Wind and Port Development to lead the state's effort to develop renewable energy, but also while protecting our fisheries and coastal environment. But as we look to renewable energy, we really also must address the damage carbon dioxide and other emissions are causing. In New Hampshire, we have the Commission on Natural Resources and Environment investigating emerging environmental threats. Here, as elsewhere, sea level rise planning is now central to New Hampshire government agencies. But the Gulf of Maine waters are among the fastest rising temperatures in the world. And we're already seeing steep declines in species the fisheries depend on. We've lost northern shrimp, for example, just in the last 5 to 10 years. And warmer water and more intense storm water in the estuaries exacerbates nitrogen overloading from wastewater treatment and from runoff from increased storm precipitation. And ocean acidification here threatens finfish, but also the flourishing shellfish aquaculture industries. And acidification in estuaries and coastal waters is increased with more freshwater runoff. So we have to mitigate this. We're also deeply concerned in New Hampshire with ocean plastics, as microthreads are in the fish, in the finfish, and therefore in human tissue, including in utero. This is a particular concern with PFAS, polyvinyl compounds. People know these as the forever cancer-causing chemicals. It's why we're moving forward on derelict fishing gear and coastal plastic cleanup, while monitoring PFAS that is leaching out of the plastics and also from other sources into our waterways. In New Hampshire, we recognize that we must help local communities who just aren't prepared technically or with other kinds of know-how to mitigate these problems. And it's why in New Hampshire, we are establishing the coastal program in state legislation. And as others have said, obviously these problems can't be tackled alone. And it's why this effort spearheaded by NCEL is just so important. And I hope that we can really think about making every day Ocean Day. The health of our communities and economies depends on what Rachel Carson years ago, in really starting the environmental movement, what Rachel Carson called the sea around us. And thank you, Dylan.
Thank you so much, Senator, for all your work. And thank you, everyone. I mean, you really epitomize the work that we're trying to do here. All of these efforts that are happening at the state level, the many different ways that you're approaching coastal concepts, that we want to find a space, and what we're creating here with the Coastal Working Group is to bring that together so you can share it as you're sharing with folks today that are listening now, but also with each other throughout for many years to come, and really strengthen the work that you're doing and build on the great successes. For all of those watching the live stream right now, I'd encourage you to submit questions through that, and our team is monitoring those. And when you do submit a question, please note if there's a certain state you're directing it to or a specific legislator. I'd like to start with one, and to build on something Representative Lukanov was talking about and others have mentioned as well. And as we think about expanding the frame of ocean policy and how we're thinking more of the oceans now as a climate solution and part of our economic livelihoods and all these different concepts, it's important to consider the environmental justice implications and the impacts on the most impacted communities as well. And I know that many of the bills have started to include that lens and to start incorporating more of these impacts into the policies. And I would love to know really an open question of how some of you and your states are starting to work on that from the ocean policy lens.
Dylan, I'm happy to come off mute real quick. Excuse the background noise, I apologize. You know, in Washington State, we passed the the Healthy Environment for All Act, the HEAL Act, which incorporated across all agencies, how can we better incorporate and address equity and justice into environmental decisions that are going to be impacting our most vulnerable communities. These vulnerable communities are communities that are the underrepresented, that deal with the highest pollution levels within our state. It also has a seat at the table for our obligation as a state to honor the treaty rights as co-managers and protect the natural resources. The Healthy Environmental Act provides us a platform of not only identifying the most underrepresented communities, but also what is the environmental impact within those communities, and then how do we direct science, funding, and programs into those areas. When we look at ocean acts that we want to incorporate, we're going to look along the ocean areas in our communities, those most vulnerable communities with the highest density of underrepresented communities, which is really important to Washington State to invest in. How do we build their tomorrows so they can remain in the place that either they've called home since time immemorial, or that we're able to incorporate in funding and investments there. The Climate Commitment Act incorporated the HEAL Act into it, but it also had a sovereign platform to it where we worked with the treaty tribes in that area and provided $50 million to those tribal communities to address moving their communities off of the shoreline, but then also 10% of the revenue that was being used and received from the Climate Change Impact Group after the cap and trade. 10% of that funding would go towards those tribal communities to help them address climate change impact. This is how we incorporated equity, justice, and the relationship to our sovereign nations into two very different bills that really help us build a more resilient Washington State. Thank you, Dylan.
And Dylan, maybe I'll add a little bit to that as well. You know, I think that if Representative Fernandez were here or Senator Ewert were here, that they would agree with me that one of the strongest means that states have to address environmental justice issues is through the offshore wind power procurement agreements. And my Senate Bill 151, and I know that other New England states in their power procurement agreements address very specifically that this development and utilities and industry that comes in must look to the ways in which through hiring practices and other practices and job training, you name it, that they can help these communities. I mean, we found in New Hampshire that in our state, the communities have been disproportionately affected and will be disproportionately affected by sea level rise, and also being affected right now in hundreds of millions of dollars of extra healthcare costs are communities of color and lower income communities. So it seems only fair that if we are moving towards renewable energy, that that becomes a vehicle to make sure that the damage that has been done through carbon dioxide from power production, that damage be undone by environmental justice efforts as well.
Thank you for that. Representative Lowen, was there anything you would like to add?
Not specifically. I think as with I'm sure this holds true for everyone, there's a lot of interest and discussion in doing more to address the equity issue, and a lot of questions about how that translates into concrete actions. And so we've been having this discussion over here in Hawaii as well, and thinking about, what can we, look at introducing next session, or, can there be work done by the Climate Commission, for example, to help our agencies be not only directed to think about equity, but given actual guidelines of how to do that. And I think, we're moving on to that next step of this discussion.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question has to do with the federal government. And as has been mentioned, there are more approvals happening now and more conversations taking place about state-federal collaboration. And a question for you all is how this group and your work can be strengthened through the Coastal Working Group to better raise a voice to the federal government and be seen as partners going forward. And that one will be open to everyone.
Well, I'll jump in, Dylan. I mean, look at the states that are in this coalition, and then look at where their representatives in Congress and their senators in Congress are placed on various committees, and the policies that they in Washington want to make sure are effective to benefit their states. So I think that we have immense capacity really to leverage that, and also to bring the local story. Why does it make a difference that when we're looking at resiliency in infrastructure bills, that there be funding to help coastal communities? And why won't our federal delegation just move BOEM forward, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, forward more quickly on offshore wind? And also, this is just so much a matter of jobs, and we know here what workforce training can do and how that money can get directed to our career and technical education centers, our community colleges, our universities. So I think, we put us all together, and we've got some oomph, huh?
Absolutely. Representative Lowen, anything you'd like to add? Beth, love to offer an opportunity for you to share both.
I just want to.
As a state legislator and
the duality of my life. So the states are the building blocks, and we've, in my opinion, been holding everything together environmentally and on the ocean for the last 4 years. But now, with the new administration, the tremendous opportunity to work together with the federal government is going to be there. And NCEL is going to be in a very good place to be able to help bring that connection in a stronger way, so that we can give our work to the federal government so that they can see what's been happening. And I know that they do. They have some incredibly good people in good positions. And I think this is just the right time. And thank God, because as all of you have said, we've got to step up and we've got to see these changes. You've talked about the problems. And of course, in Alaska, we have every issue that you're talking about, and I feel it's magnified. Being close to ground zero with the Arctic. So I just think we need to be, we're forming at a good time. We can form our priorities, and we can have direct access to federal agencies. And that's just going to be tremendously exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a question that came in through the live stream, another one on, are there any policies that you all have seen that are well-intentioned but actually counterproductive for this work, like policies that states should look out for? And I know that this does play well into the lessons learned that we like to share through the working group. And so I would open this up. I know Representative Lekanoff, you're currently off camera, but please feel free to chime in as well. And once again, an open question to all three of you.
Well, it's for offshore wind. Make sure you're really closely connected and listen to your fishing community, right? I mean, I think we get to learn from other states about that. I also would say that, you know, there's so many economic interests in the coastal areas, whether it's recreation, tourism, real estate, and I think that the successful legislation in the states are going to be ones that make sure that you have those interest groups on board. And I'll just say one word too about why this group is so important. Is that, you know, something like ocean acidification, right? I mean, it's a vast problem, but no one state can deal with that. We've got to have these kinds of coalitions. So I would hope that any state legislation would look to the ways in which it would build in collaboration with other states.
I was just going to echo that. I don't know if the asker of that question had something specific in mind. I'd have to take a while to think about what could be this policy we've passed that we shouldn't have. Nothing is coming to mind, but I think definitely a lesson learned, as Senator Waters mentioned, is that continuing to be in conversations with community partners and stakeholders is so important. There's so many stakeholders and users of the ocean for various purposes, and everyone feels a sense of ownership. So whether the policy has to do with energy or fishery management or conservation, I think that having, you know, kind of a grassroots effort, community outreach, and collaboration is very, very important.
Thank you so much. And Representative Lekanoff, I see we lost you again there. I just want to thank you all for really underscoring the goal of collaboration, the work that you're doing, the commitment to finding best practices and learning from lessons that didn't work out so well and things that are working really well that we can share. I thank you, Beth, for being here, for being NCEL's board president, and your continued commitment, even after leaving the legislature, to keep working on these issues and moving them forward. And I want to thank Ava Ibanez, our Ocean Policy Fellow, who is just doing a wonderful job leading this working group and making sure that legislators are connected across the country. We are going to wrap up here. I know that there's been a few legislators coming in and out, with Representative Bloom and Fernandez as well, and just underscores that you all as state legislators are balancing so many different commitments at every given moment. And so we are so grateful for the time that you gave us today and the time that you dedicate to this work, and really appreciate your continued and ongoing leadership. For anyone listening, if you're interested in learning more about this issue or about these bills, please visit our website, ncel.net/climate-and-energy. And if you have any questions for legislators directly, you can contact our communications manager, Taylor Anderson, at tanderson@ncel.net. That's TANDERSON@ncel.net. Thank you all so much for your time once again, and we look forward to working with you in the year ahead.